What happens when you fake your death, but surprised that your own family is happy to see you gone? You won't believe the shocking of my life. Stay with me till the end. I've been there. My name is Emily Parker, and I'm 27 years old. I grew up in a nice house in Boston, Massachusetts, where on the outside, everything seemed perfect. My father, David Parker, had a successful business, and my mother, Cynthia, was the perfect homemaker, hosting parties and making sure the family always looked put together. But behind all the picture-perfect moments, I was slowly dying inside. If you're watching this and have ever felt like you were just a tool in your family, a person they use when they need something, then keep watching. You might understand what I'm about to say. I had to be the responsible one. My father was always too busy with work to pay attention to me. He'd come home late, barely speak to me, and if he did, it was only about his business. He would throw me the occasional good job when I did something right, but those words felt hollow when they came from someone who didn't even know me. My mom, Cynthia, wasn't any better. She would constantly criticize everything I did, from the way I dressed to how I carried myself. Nothing was ever good enough for her, and I was always left feeling like I wasn't worthy of love, no matter how hard I tried. When I was growing up, I tried so hard to fit into the mold they wanted for me, but no matter what I did, it was never good enough. My father's praises were few and far between, while my mother's criticisms were endless. It was like nothing could make them proud. My younger brother, Jake, had it easy. He was always the golden child, doing no wrong in their eyes. And my sister, Lily, she was the pretty one, the girl who got all the attention without lifting a finger. And I was just the girl in the middle, not the smart one, not the pretty one, the one who always had to work hard while the others got the praise. Does this sound familiar to you? Ever felt like you were invisible to your family, always trying to get their approval but never succeeding? I bet you've been there. Then came the moment that made me realize just how little I meant to them. I had worked hard, saved up, and finally paid off my student loans. It had been a long road, working 2 jobs while juggling my degree. But I did it. I was proud of myself. I thought this was the moment I could finally breathe, but then my father asked me for money again. But this time, it was different. He said his business was in trouble and that if I didn't help, things would get worse for the whole family. I don't know why I thought this time would be different, but I gave him everything. Every penny of the savings I had worked so hard for. I told myself it would be temporary, that once things got better, I'd get it back. But that never happened. A few weeks later, I overheard my dad on the phone. He was laughing, talking about how his business had turned around. He didn't mention me at all, just how things were going great for him. I stood there in shock, realizing I had been nothing more than a financial tool for him. I had worked so hard, saved so much, and all it did was make him richer while I was left with nothing. No gratitude, no thank you, just me being used. At that moment, everything clicked. I wasn't loved for who I was. I was only loved for what I could give. How does that feel when you realize your own family only sees you as a tool for their own gain? It stung like nothing else. And then there was my mom. When she found out I had given my father all my savings, she didn't even care about the sacrifice. She didn't care that I had risked my own future to help them. Instead, she scolded me for not managing my finances properly and accused me of being selfish. She said I didn't consider the family's needs. It was the final blow. I walked away from that conversation feeling empty. How could my own mother say that to me? How could she, the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally, turn her back on me like that? I was nothing more than an afterthought to them. A tool. A resource to be used when needed. At that moment, I knew I had to get out. I was done. So what would you do if you were me? Would you stay and take it, or would you take drastic measures to escape? I bet a lot of you might feel like Emily in this situation. Some of you might be watching this right now, thinking, I've been there. Well, let me tell you, I didn't just want to leave. I had to leave. But how? That's when I came up with the idea. The idea wasn't easy to swallow. It felt wrong, it felt crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The only way I would ever be free of them was if I was gone for good. What if I faked my death? Now I know what you might be thinking. Emily, that's extreme. And it was. But after everything I had endured, I felt I had no choice. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I could provide. They would probably be relieved if I were gone, so I began to plan. I started doing research, looking into how people faked their deaths. I found articles, guides, and even watched videos about disappearing without a trace. The guilt was overwhelming. The fear was paralyzing. How could I leave everyone behind? My family would never see me again. But then I thought, would they really miss me? Would they even care? They hadn't shown any signs of truly loving me, so why would this be any different? What do you think? Would you go as far as faking your death to escape a toxic family dynamic? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Do you think Emily should have tried another way? The hardest part was knowing I would never see my friends or family again, knowing I would have to sever all ties with the life I knew. But I couldn't stay. I had to get out, and this was the only way. I began cutting off communication with everyone, friends, family, even Sarah. I couldn't risk anyone finding out. No one could know what I was planning. The more I planned, the more certain I became. This was my only way out. I made sure the plan was perfect. I chose a small town in Vermont, far away from Boston. I arranged a fake car accident on the outskirts of the city. It had to look real. I even set up a fake obituary and made sure it was posted online. I wrote letters to my family, telling them that I was gone for good and that they should not search for me. I made sure there would be no hope left for them, no chance of reconciliation. I'm sure you're thinking, this is insane, Emily. I was thinking the same thing, too. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the only way to be free. I had to go through with it. The day came sooner than I expected. I stood by my bedroom window, looking out at the Boston skyline, knowing it would be the last time I ever saw it. I took a deep breath and left. As I walked away from everything I had known, I felt a strange sense of relief. The guilt was still there, but it started to fade away as I realized I was free. And you know what? As I watched the news spread about my death, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. But what happened next, what I discovered about my family's reaction, is where the real story begins. And believe me, you won't believe what I found out. Have you ever felt like you were just a tool to your family? How far would you go to escape a toxic family dynamic? Share your thought in the comment below, share where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for the rest of the story. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. I had done it. I was free. Free from my family's control, free from the constant weight of their expectations, free from the constant cycle of giving without receiving. But even in the quiet, as I watched everything unfold from the shadows, I couldn't help but wonder, what was next? Would they even notice that I was truly gone? Or would they simply move on with their lives as they always had? It's a strange feeling, knowing no one can see you anymore, knowing no one can ask questions, knowing no one can demand anything from you. But as the days passed, I started to realize something I hadn't expected. I was curious. Not about my life, but about their reaction. How long would it take them to feel the loss? How long would it take before they realized that I had been holding everything together for them? For all the pain I'd felt growing up, for all the times I'd been pushed aside, there was a small part of me that wanted to know, would they miss me? I began watching them from a distance, hidden in plain sight. My family, so consumed by their own world, didn't even know I was right there, observing every move they made. My father, David, wasted no time. It was like nothing had changed. He went straight back to his business dealings, making calls, pushing deals as though his daughter had never existed. It was sickening, but I couldn't look away. He didn't pause, didn't shed a tear. Instead, he focused on the next big deal, the next business transaction. My life had been a mere inconvenience, a problem he could easily erase. The funeral wasn't even over before he was back to his important work. I remember feeling something strange when I watched him. Not sadness, not anger, just a strange sense of power. How had I been so blind to this? He had never seen me as a person, never cared about me as a daughter. I had been nothing but a tool, a means to an end. And now, here he was, not even taking a moment to think about what he had lost, just moving forward, pushing past my memory like it was nothing. If you were my sister, Emily, you've always known how he works, never stopping, never thinking about the people who helped him get there. It wasn't surprising to me, but still, watching him do it so easily made my blood boil. How could he be this cold? How could he move on so quickly without even a moment of reflection? I was supposed to be someone he cared about, but now I realized the truth. I had never truly mattered to him. Then there was my mother, Cynthia. Watching her was even worse. It wasn't just that she didn't cry or show any sign of grief. It was that she didn't seem to care at all. Not about me. Not about my life, my struggles, or my sacrifice. She immediately began making calls to the lawyer. She wasn't concerned about what was happening to me. She was already talking about the money, the house, the assets I had left behind. She asked David if they had taken care of everything, if the estate had been settled. I thought I would feel devastated to watch my mother act like this, but instead I felt anger. A deep, searing anger. Here she was, planning how she could use my death to her advantage. She didn't care about losing her daughter. She cared about securing her future. As I watched her speak, her voice steady, her words clipped, I realized just how much I had been taken for granted. For all the years I had given to them, for all the times I had put my own life aside to help, I was nothing but a tool to her, just like I had been to my father. And then there was Lily, my younger sister. If you were watching this, you've always been the one who was always in the spotlight, the one everyone looked at and admired, always living in your own world. I had expected Lily to be sad, maybe even to mourn my loss. But instead, I saw her going through my things, picking out clothes from my closet, taking the things I had left behind as if they were hers for the taking. She didn't seem affected at all. She just carried on, without a single thought about the sister she had just lost. It wasn't just that Lily was self-absorbed, it was that she didn't care. She never had, and now, it was as if my death was just another thing for her to move past. How could she be so callous? I was her sister, yet she treated my things as if they were nothing more than possessions to be claimed. How could she not feel anything? But Jake, my younger brother, was different. When I watched him, I saw the confusion on his face, the questions that he wasn't sure how to ask. He sat in my room a few times, just staring at my things, like he couldn't make sense of it. He didn't know what to feel. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe Jake was the only one who had ever really seen me. Jake had always been the quiet one, always in the background, and maybe that's why it hurt so much to see him like this. He wasn't crying, but I could tell he was struggling. He didn't know what to do with the fact that I was gone. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that I was okay, but I knew it wasn't time. Not yet. I needed to watch more, see how far they would go before they figured it out. Do you think Emily should reach out to Jake now, or should she let him come to his own realization? I wondered that myself. He seemed lost, but the truth was, he was the only one who had ever made an effort to understand me. I wasn't ready to give him the answers just yet. He needed to feel the consequences of his indifference. David and Cynthia continued to go about their lives, pretending everything was normal, but there was a change in the air. I could feel it like the calm before the storm. It wasn't immediate, but over time I saw them begin to unravel. My father's business, which had once been so smooth, now started showing signs of stress. Calls that were once returned quickly now took longer. Deals that had been guaranteed started falling through. The people who used to look at him like a king started to look at him with indifference. It was strange to watch him struggle in a way I'd never seen before. He'd always been confident, always in control. But now, I could see the cracks in his armor. I felt a strange satisfaction watching him lose his grip, piece by piece. It wasn't enough for me to just disappear. I wanted him to feel the absence. I wanted him to realize that I had been the one holding everything together, and now that I was gone, he didn't know how to fix it. But watching my mother was even harder. Cynthia didn't shed a tear. She was too busy calling everyone friends, colleagues, anyone who could help her fill the void I had left behind. She was already plotting her next move, making sure everything she wanted was secured. She didn't even try to hide it. It was as if I had never been a person to her. I had just been another asset to manage. And then came the first clue. Jake started texting me, asking if I was really gone, if there was a chance I was out there somewhere. I hadn't expected it. I thought he would just move on like everyone else. But no, he was starting to ask the questions I had been hoping he would. He didn't know what to believe. He didn't understand why I had done what I did, but there he was, reaching out. I could see the confusion in his texts, the uncertainty in his words. He didn't know if I was alive or if I was truly gone, but he wanted to know. I didn't answer his texts. Not yet. It wasn't the right time. But part of me knew that Jake was the only one who would ever really understand. I wasn't sure what the next step was, but I knew one thing for sure. They were starting to realize something was missing, and they would never be the same again. For now, I would stay in the shadows. I would watch, and I would wait for the moment when they couldn't run from the truth any longer. It had been a month since I died. A full month of watching my family, my so-called family, move on without me like I was just another fleeting memory. At first, I had convinced myself that I would feel guilty for what I had done. But no, the more I observed them, the less I felt remorse. If anything, I felt power. A strange, quiet power that came from knowing I had control over their lives without them even realizing it. My father, David, continued on his usual path. He threw himself into his business, making deals, hosting meetings, and always looking for the next big success. He barely seemed to notice the small cracks that were beginning to form in his empire. I saw the signs. The calls that used to come in at lightning speed now took longer to return. People were starting to question his authority, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care enough to look. If you were Emily, you know how he works, always focused on himself, never looking at the people around him. The cracks were there, but he kept on going, burying himself in work. It made me feel something strange. Was it justice? Or just satisfaction from seeing him begin to unravel? I couldn't tell, but I could see the cracks in his armor, even if no one else could. And I felt a strange sense of triumph. He thought he had it all, but now he was starting to lose control. And my mother, Cynthia, didn't even try to hide the fact that she was already moving on to her next phase. She hadn't mourned me, hadn't shed a tear for her only daughter. Instead, she was already making calls to secure what was rightfully hers. She was too busy with my life to care about me when I was alive, and now that I was gone, it was like I never existed in the first place. I remember watching her one evening, sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, flipping through papers with a smile on her face. I could see her eyes glinting with excitement. She wasn't grieving. She was planning, scheming, figuring out how to get her hands on what she could now that I was out of the picture. Her voice echoed through the house when she spoke to the lawyer, asking, "What's next? What do we do with her things? How do we make sure the inheritance is secure?" She was completely indifferent. No sadness, no reflection, just a cold efficiency. It was as if I had never mattered. She wasn't concerned with what I had done for the family or how much I had sacrificed. She was already thinking about herself. If you were Emily, it would hit hard, right? To see your mother, the one person who should have loved you unconditionally, be so indifferent to your death. It hurt more than I expected. But then again, it was just more confirmation that I had made the right decision. I wasn't important to her. I was never going to be. I watched my siblings next. Lily, my younger sister, was still her usual self, living in her own world. She wasn't mourning me. In fact, she was carrying on like I had never existed. The same self-absorbed attitude, the same shallow conversations. But what stung the most was seeing her go through my things like she was picking out clothes for herself. It wasn't even about taking what she wanted. It was about the fact that she didn't even seem to realize that my death wasn't just an event. It was the end of everything I had once been to them. And Jake, my younger brother, he was the only one who seemed to feel something. At least that's what I thought when I saw him sitting in my room just staring at the walls. I could tell he didn't know what to do with himself. It wasn't sadness or grief, but confusion, a sense of loss. He didn't seem to know how to process it. He was the only one who seemed to be questioning what had happened, the only one who seemed to care that I was gone. But even Jake wasn't enough to make me reconsider. No, I was beyond that now. He had been part of the problem too, even if he didn't realize it. My family had taken me for granted, and now they were learning what it felt like to lose someone, to lose me. Can you relate to Emily's feelings of seeing her family move on so easily? Do you think her brother, Jake, will ever understand what she did? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you're subscribed for the next part of this story. The day it all changed started off like any other. I was watching them, waiting for the right moment to make my move, when I saw Jake's first real sign of realization. He came to the house, sat at the kitchen table, and stared out the window for what seemed like hours. He wasn't texting or talking on the phone. He was just sitting there looking lost. And then he did something unexpected. He texted me. He wasn't sure if I was alive, but he didn't want to believe that I was really gone. His message read, "I don't understand. Why did you leave? Where are you?" I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me wanted to reach out to tell him everything, to tell him I was still here, watching, waiting. But I didn't, not yet. The time wasn't right, not yet. I couldn't help but smile bitterly as I read his message. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't even an apology. It was just a question. A simple, "Where are you?" But that question, that one simple message, meant everything to me. It was the first time someone in my family had genuinely questioned my disappearance. For the first time. Jake seemed to feel the weight of my absence. But did I want to reveal myself? Was this the moment I'd been waiting for? I didn't know. Part of me wanted to respond, to tell him I was okay, to let him know that I was still here, still watching, still waiting for them to realize what they had done. But then another part of me held back, knowing that this was the beginning of something bigger. The beginning of their realization. They hadn't learned their lesson yet. They needed to feel it longer. They needed to feel the void. What would you do if you were in my position? Would you respond to Jake, or would you keep your distance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As the days went on, I continued to watch them. I saw the cracks in their lives begin to grow wider. My father, David, was starting to lose his edge. His business was faltering. Deals weren't going through as smoothly as they used to. People were no longer impressed by him. The self-confidence he had always carried with him now seemed fragile. He didn't know how to handle the loss of his daughter. The man who had once been so invincible was now starting to show cracks in his armor. And I felt a sense of power in that. And my mother, well, she was still acting like everything was fine, but I knew her too well. I could see the small signs. The way she kept glancing at the door, waiting for someone to call, the way she would check her phone every few minutes, expecting an answer. She wasn't as in control as she had thought. She was starting to realize that without me, without my presence, things weren't as easy as they once seemed. As for my sister, Lily, I kept watching her, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. She had always been selfish, always only thinking of herself. Seeing her go through my things like I was just some object to be taken made my stomach turn, but I wasn't surprised. She had never cared. She never would. But Jake was different. I had been watching him for weeks, and I could tell he was starting to question everything. Slowly, he began to piece things together. It wasn't enough to make him understand, but it was a start. What do you think will happen next? Will Emily reach out to Jake, or will she let him continue questioning? Share your thoughts below, and make sure you're subscribed so you can see how this all plays out. I wasn't ready to confront them yet, but the time would come. And when it did, I would make sure they understood the true cost of taking me for granted. For now, I would stay hidden, but every day that passed, I felt a little more satisfied. They had started to feel it. The emptiness I had left behind, and they didn't know it yet, but it was only going to get worse. I had been watching them for weeks. At first, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had faked my death, cut ties with everyone, and disappeared into the shadows of my new life. I wanted to know how my family would react, if they would feel the emptiness of my absence, or if they would move on without a second thought. And over time, I saw it. They started to feel it. The truth began to settle in, slowly at first, like a crack in a perfectly polished surface. But then, as the days went by, that crack widened. They weren't quite sure what was missing, but they knew something was wrong. The first sign that they were starting to question everything came when my father, David, called one of his business partners in a fit of panic. I overheard his side of the conversation, the way his voice shook when he said, "We need to pull together everything we've got. Emily's disappearance is a mess. No one knows what to make of it. There's something off about this whole situation." It was hard to believe that David, the man who had never taken a moment to appreciate me, the one who had used me without a second thought, was now feeling the consequences of my absence. But it was happening. Slowly, surely, my father was starting to feel the weight of my disappearance, not just emotionally, but professionally too. Do you think David truly cares, or is he just worried about the damage to his business? I know it's tough to tell with someone like him. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. But as the days wore on, I noticed something even more unsettling. My mother, Cynthia, was starting to crack too. She had always been so composed, so in control, like she knew exactly how to handle every situation. But the moment I disappeared, that control slipped from her grasp. I watched her anxiously packing around the house one evening, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, trying to reach someone, anyone, to help her sort out what had happened. She kept calling friends, lawyers, financial advisors. But with every call, I could hear the panic in her voice. The woman who had always made everything look so effortless now seemed desperate. She wasn't talking about mourning me. No, she was more concerned with what she could get. She was worried about securing her future without me. My death had shaken her in a way I hadn't expected, not because of love or grief, but because it had disrupted her plans. She walked into the kitchen one night, her eyes hollow and tired. I watched her pour herself a glass of wine, as if that would calm her nerves, but her hand trembled as she took the first sip. It wasn't just the loss of me. It was the realization that she had lost the one person who always made sure things were taken care of, the one person who kept the family functioning. Now that I was gone, she had no one to manage the details for her. And that, I realized, was the crux of it all. They hadn't cared about me when I was there, but now that I was gone, they were starting to see how much they relied on me, how much they had taken me for granted. How do you think Emily feels watching her mom panic? It's crazy, right? Do you think she's feeling any guilt at this point, or is she just enjoying the fact that her family is struggling? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Jake had always been the one who seemed to be the most confused about my disappearance. He wasn't like David or Cynthia, who immediately moved on to the next thing. He was different. The more I watched him, the more I realized that he had been struggling. He was the one person in this entire mess who had shown any real emotion. He wasn't angry. He wasn't pretending to be fine. He was just lost. One night, I saw him sitting in my room again, looking through my old pictures and belongings. There was no music, no phone calls, just silence. He seemed deep in thought, and I could tell he was trying to put the pieces together. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but I could see that he was starting to question things. Then he did something unexpected. He texted me. "I don't get it, Emily. Why did you leave like this? Where are you?" I stared at the screen for a while, wondering if I should respond. Should I? It felt like the right moment. He was finally realizing that something wasn't right. But then I remembered what I was doing here. I wasn't just watching them struggle for the sake of it. I had to make them feel the consequences of how they had treated me. I wasn't ready to reveal myself. Not yet. But it hit me. Jake was the only one who had ever truly looked out for me. Sure, he hadn't always been the most vocal, but he was the one who had never expected anything from me. He was the only one who ever seemed like he might understand me, even if he didn't fully know what had happened. I didn't reply, I just let his message sit there. It wasn't time yet, but I would have to face him eventually. I couldn't stay hidden forever. Would you reply to Jake's message, or would you hold out longer, making him feel the weight of your absence? I think it's a tough choice. Drop your thoughts below. I'm really curious what you would do in Emily's place. Days passed, and the family continued to spiral. I saw my mother trying to pick up the pieces, but it was clear she wasn't in control anymore. I could hear her calling people she hadn't spoken to in years, trying to fix what had been broken, but nothing seemed to go right. She was panicking, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. She was realizing, too late, how much she had depended on me. David, on the other hand, tried to brush it off, pretending everything was fine. But I could see the cracks in his bravado. His business wasn't doing as well as it had been. Deals were falling through. People were starting to avoid him. His name didn't hold the weight it used to. For the first time in years, I saw my father struggle. He wasn't the invincible man he thought he was. He was human, and for the first time, that humanity was exposed. I watched as he tried to make calls, trying to pull things back together, but nothing seemed to work. It was as if he was losing everything, and it was my absence that had set it all in motion. Let me know if you want me to continue with my story. Just type yes, continue.